Welcome, everyone. We're going to talk today about managing your business. That's what we're going to talk about in today's Copilot coaching lesson. Now, this lesson relates in many ways to an earlier lesson, so I wanted to point this out. And that lesson is under the operations module. And it was the presentation by John Grant, which he called Visual Systems for Law Practice Productivity, but I renamed in terms of, for this course, I called it Creating Operational Efficiency, because that's really what he was talking about in that presentation. And he said, you need to visualize this. And he showed you how to do it using things like Kanban boards and so forth. So if you want to focus on this, and I think some of you will, that's another lesson that you could go back and look at. And remember, we have transcripts. I believe we have one for that one. If we don't, I'll create one. But we should have transcripts, so you don't need to watch the whole thing if you don't want to. You can just read it. So what we're really talking about here is how to successfully run a business. And a lot of businesses are not run successfully. If you want to know how to do this, there's a lot of books out there that you could find. You can go on Amazon, but this is a book that has gotten a lot of attention, deservedly so. All the people that I have talked to as I've been growing this business, it seems like this is a book everyone has read multiple times, that everyone recommends. All the successful small business owners I come across, marketers and whatnot, they recommend this book. They've read it multiple times. And I have a copy of it, and I had skim read the first part of it, and I got the gist of what it was about. And I thought, well, that's fine. I understand what it's about, and I can recommend it. But then I thought, well, if I'm going to recommend this book, I really need to read it. So I got it. I got the book off my bookshelf. I plowed through it and read it, made extensive notes, and then I went back through and looked at my notes. The place that's in this book, but it's not just going to be only about this book. It's really about what this fellow, Michael Gerber, says that you can take out and start acting on. So you don't, if you want to read the book, you can. And I think it's a good book. It's got great reviews, but you don't have to. Now, this book, when I say it's respected advice, people like Tim Ferriss, who's well known as a New York Times bestselling author multiple times. He's a young fellow who wrote a book called The 4-Hour Workweek in 2007. It became a blockbuster success. He's written many books since then. He's gone on to do TV shows. He does VC funding in Silicon Valley. He, helped fund Uber. He's a guy who knows how to run businesses. He didn't when he started, but then he did. And this is a book he recommends. In fact, I think in his 4-Hour Workweek book, where he only recommends 4 books, this is one of the 4 that he lists. So he's saying, if you're starting a small business, don't get bogged down by reading lots of things. This is one of the 4 books you need to read. And then Jack Canfield, who's well known for having written several books, and they're about business, and one of them is called Chicken Soup for the Soul. It's about business and mindset and success and so forth. But he also says that this book is really good. Okay, so those are 2 people that recommend it that I can point you to that you may know. The customer reviews for this book are off the charts. There's almost 2,000 reviews. It's got a 4.6 average rating. 73% of them are 5-star and 15 are 4-star. And when you add those together, you almost get to 90. And whenever you see that kind of level of high 5-star and 4-star ratings and not that many 3-star and 2-star and 1-star complaints, which there's always going to be some because people will find things to complain about, you know that that this has been successful. And I read some of the negative reviews, and I agree with some of the nitpicky stuff. Like, some people say, well, he talks too much. It takes too long to spit it out, or whatever the nitpicky stuff is. But those are the kind of people that if they start a business are going to fail because they're focusing on the wrong thing. The key here is to focus on what's right about this book. And if you read the positive reviews, and this is, I think, was the top review I found, it begins with, "This book literally changed my life. I own a small business with around 15 employees. I'd been struggling for many years doing all kinds of managerial work myself. We did great work, but at great expense of his sanity. A mentor of his told him to read the book. Before he read it, he was working 9 hours a day, 6 days a week, and then less than a year after reading it, he was able to take a 6-month vacation around the world while the business ran by itself." Now, I don't know how well positioned he was. He probably had just not as many things to fix, and it was mostly mindset stuff. But this is a fellow who got great results. Another person who read it 2 years ago when she was barely starting, or he or she was starting a business, and reread it again, and everything is owed to this book, or so much is owed to the book. Now, this person says, is it perfect? No. It's cringy when the author talks about how beautiful and youthful his protege is, this person that he's writing about, because he's got this fictional person whose name I think is Sarah, who starts a pie baking business, and he uses this analogy. I think it's a real client, to change the name and change some features, but he uses her example to show you what kinds of problems a typical business has and then how to work through them. And yes, he is flowery and he likes to describe things, but I mean, you can skim past this stuff. Your eyes are not locked in place. That's what I did. There were parts I found enjoyable, and then if he became too florid, I just skipped over those parts to get to the meat. This is another person who is referring to one element of the book, which I'll talk about in a second, about are you a technician, a manager, or an entrepreneur? This fellow says that it's easily worth the time to read. He was self-employed for 10 years. He knew the struggle between the inner technician, manager, and entrepreneur, but didn't have a framework to understand it. And that's really one key thing about the book, is he's giving folks who are running a business a way to understand why it is that they are struggling with their business, because it's hard to understand this in a meaningful way. So that's what he focuses on. So another 5-star review. So that's all of which to say the book is great. Now, there is a version of this book called The E-Myth Attorney, which Michael Gerber didn't write. What he has done is he's licensed and overseen and made sure that other people who write these books in different industries or service areas are true to his message. This book was written by 2 attorneys, Robert Armstrong and Sanford Fish. They're both estate planning lawyers, and I think, if I remember the book, which I bought but don't have because I gave it to someone, they use the estate planning practice model to explain things. Now, here's the thing, and this goes back to mindset. You really need to not let your mind trick you into going down a path of going, well, they're talking about estate planning, and your mind's not going to say this in words that echo to you like, the booming voice of God speaking from a burning bush, but your mind is going to instill in you, or, insidiously steer you into concluding things that are going to lead you down the wrong path. These books have big ideas, and you just need to focus on the big ideas. And, you don't need to read the E-Myth Attorney book, right? But there'll be an allure like, oh, well, they've written it for attorneys. It'll be more, it's the same information, okay? And if you have an estate planning practice, yeah, that's different than a criminal law practice, and that's different than, litigation. And there are differences in how we practice law, but that's the technical work. The work of managing our business and growing it is the same for every small business. And we need to think of ourselves as a small business that happens to be one where the main person, you, practices law. Now, the book says, here's the key to the book. So the reason why it's called the E-Myth is that it says, everyone wants to start a new business, and, every day thousands of people start a new business, and the scenario goes something like this. A friend, or maybe they start dreaming that, like, well, I've been doing this thing for somebody else, and I think I can do it on my own and start my own business doing this. So that would be like you're leaving a law firm and you go to start your own firm. But if you're talking about, pie maker Sarah, she wasn't working for somebody else. She just had a dream because her aunt taught her how to make pies, and her friend said, you're the greatest pie maker in the world. You should start a business. Now, if you stop and think about this, lots of people who have done this. This is the American dream, okay? And this book is poking a hole in the bubble of the American dream and saying, this is a business you're getting into. The fact that you know how to do something, which he calls the technical work, the fact that you know how to bake a pie, or the fact that you know how to be a lawyer and go to court and do lawyer stuff, is not the key thing you need to know how to do in order to successfully run a business. So the fatal assumption is, according to Gerber, that if you understand the technical work of a business, then you understand how to run a business that does that kind of technical work. And that's just not true. That's why businesses fail, because every day people start thinking that that is the case. Oh, well, I know how to practice law. I'll just practice law and I'll get clients and all kinds of stuff. So this is why businesses don't do well. And 80% of all small businesses fail in the first 5 years. And this is a large part of the reason. People's expectation is excessive. Their understanding of what it takes to run a business is insufficient. And so they get into something and they get in over their heads. And it's like, the boiling frog, it's not like the frog jumps into the boiling water and goes, oh my God, this is horrible, and jumps out. He jumps in nice water and then it slowly starts rising and you don't notice that it's boiling. And then there's all kinds of problems. Now, what I love about this book, and this, when I went back, I remembered that there was a great quote, and the very first page has this wonderful quote, which is from Joseph Heller, who wrote Catch-22, but this is from another book. I think that maybe inside any business, there's someone slowly going crazy. And that is probably true for most small businesses, is someone in there is going crazy. And so the book is about how you can stop going crazy and, fix things. So there's some key takeaways. I'm not going to plow through it step by step and in order. I just want you to understand what this fellow's saying. And this is all you really need to know, right? Is that people who own small businesses work far more than they should for the return they're getting. And that's because they're not optimizing their business. They jumped into it, they started doing the work, and they get in over their head. So that's a problem. So he says, unless you start a business with the intention of selling it, it will almost always turn out to be a disaster. Now, notice he's not saying you should sell your business eventually. That's up to you. You don't need to sell your business. What he's saying is the mindset of somebody who starts a business with an intention of selling it is a vastly different mindset than someone who goes, I'm going to start a business. I'll see how it goes. I'll do what I can. The one who's thinking I'm going to sell it is going to be on a mission and is going to connect dots faster and better than somebody who's doing it in a kind of whimsical, I'm just painting a, watercolor portrait that's a impressionist painting here. That person isn't going to do as well. So he also focuses on this and says, how well a company does depends on two things. And this is like so obvious. Like, number one, the ability to attract customers better than other businesses. Because if you can't do that, you're not going to sell pies. You're not going to, you're going to fail. You have to get new business, right? You have to get new clients. So that's kind of obvious, perhaps, but we've talked about this. Marketing is really important and you need to focus on it. And then he says, number two is the return on equity that produces. So really what he's saying is that most people get into business and focus on all the things that generate profit or income, and they're not thinking about the long-term part of the business. If you go to sell a business to somebody, they care about the income that it's been producing and the profits, but really what they want to see is the equity. And the equity are things like we have systems in place, we have good employees in place, we have good clients who are giving us recurring revenue if that's the business model. And that is equity. But most people are focused on income because they go, well, we need money, and they zero in on that. And this is true of even people who are financially savvy or have business savviness. It's not. I mean, we see this. We've seen large corporations run by MBAs that break down. So it's not the fact that you have an MBA or you understand business per se. It's the fact that we lose sight of what we should be paying attention to as we're working on our business. So the three keys to success are lead generation, which is marketing, lead conversion, which is sales, and satisfying your clients, which is operations. And notice two out of those three really are the same thing, because I lump marketing and sales together. I love Peter Drucker's quote about good marketing, and he says, good marketing makes sales unnecessary. And I don't want to be doing sales. I know you guys don't want to either. We went to law school to enter a profession, not be, salesmen. And so, but you do have to convert those people that come to your website or that call you on the phone and convince them that you are the proper person to do the work for them. So that is actually what sales is in a business. So if we can't, as lawyers, go, I don't want to talk about sales. Look, we need to take our heads out of the sand. We're running businesses. We need to be sober and clear-headed about it. So that's what's important: lead generation, conversion, and then satisfying the clients by doing good work. So here's another key takeaway. Now, remember earlier I referred to or showed you, the thing about technician, the manager, and the visionary. So in the book, he talks about, this is a big part of the book in the beginning. He says the business owner is really three people in one, and that there's a conflict among these three people. And if you read a lot of the reviews, people say, oh, now I understand what the problems were. Now, most people, when they go into business, they understand the technician role, like the person who does the work. Oh, yes, I will start a pie making shop. I know how to make pies. Okay, great. That's the technician. Or if you're a lawyer, you're starting a law practice, you know how to, go to court or to, create the documents if you're in a transactional practice. You're the technician. That part you got. And the entrepreneur is the visionary, the person who can envision how things should be. But the entrepreneur exists for a brief shining moment in most businesses. And it's simply when the person goes, oh, I can start my own business. I can see it. I'll be making money and I'll be happy and I'll be in control of my own life. The entrepreneur has that vision, plows in, the technician takes over, the entrepreneur checks out, the manager never shows up, except that the technician who's doing the work is trying to manage things and fulfill that role. So these are three separate things, and you need to think of them as such. He also talks about the three business units. This is later in the book. So if you're going to read the book, I would recommend you kind of skim through, see where everything's placed, and you can bop around and read different parts if you want to, which, by the way, is a tactic that I use for books like this. I don't feel obligated to go through it in order. So that's something I learned from, I don't even remember who I learned it from, but I remember Tim Ferriss validated it and said he doesn't read books all the way through, or he will skip around and he'll look at the table of contents. So I bopped around. I did read it all the way through this time, but I'm telling you, you can skip. Now, there's a part in here where he talks about business units, and he breaks them down into three and then to other subparts. I don't think you need to focus on that. Just keep it simple. So if you read the book and you see those other parts, just ignore them. They don't necessarily correlate perfectly to law firm businesses, so I'm just, recalibrating it so you can see it in terms of law firms. So the three business units are: one, marketing, the fishing for new clients; the operations, cranking out your pleadings and generally being a lawyer; and then finance, which relates to, anything involving money, accounts receivable, accounts payable, all that stuff. And the finance part, really, I think, for any small firm should, as much as possible, be outsourced. In other words, you have an accountant who can help you, you have bookkeepers who can help you, you have people can, give you strategic advice about things. So that part, really, you shouldn't be doing it all unless you're just really good at it and don't mind doing it, but it's going to take up time. So that part, I would totally outsource. The operations, you're going to have people that are going to help you, and you're going to be doing a lot of it yourself because that's what you do. The marketing, you can also outsource a lot of, but really, as we've talked about, you can automate it if you're doing digital marketing and you're doing direct response with a website. So it's really in the operations area, I think, that most of the turmoil happens. But for most businesses, they don't know how to do marketing. But you guys have been well educated into this. Obviously, we need to keep working on it. It's super important. It's something you always are going to be doing. But you don't have to do it all, right? We understand that. Okay, so he says that you should think of your business as something that you want to sell. Okay, but he also talks about it as something that you should think about replicating and having multiple versions of it. Again, not because you're going to do this, because you really can, with a law firm. But he says you need to think like that, right? And so there's a great quote that he's got in the book, and this is it. There's a company out there that thinks of itself as the most successful small business in the world. Anyone want to guess what company that is? You can type it into the chat if you want to. If you know the answer, you'll win a valuable prize. I can't give you too long because I know some of you are going to be typing in, quote, the most successful small business in the world into Google. But the answer is Ray Kroc's company, McDonald's. Um, why would this company be relevant in the E-Myth? Why does Michael Gerber spend so much time talking about this company? Well, it's because this was an example of a company where it scaled, but it scaled because it had to do all of the things right. It had to make the operations efficient, it had to have systems, and it had to do a lot of things right to grow. But then once it did, through franchising, it paved the way for a lot of other companies to franchise as well. Although I know that there were other companies that were embryonically starting to franchise around the same time that McDonald's was. But I recommend you watch this movie called The Founder. It has Michael Keaton, and it's all about this Ray Kroc story, which of course they've, sanded off the edges of some truths and, to make it a better story. But essentially, the story that you see in that movie is what Michael Gerber is talking about companies needing to do. If you've watched it, then and it's a nice movie. I'm not, this is spoiler alert. McDonald's becomes successful. So it's one of those companies where I can't ruin it for you by telling you anything because you already know what happened. But it'll still be interesting, just like Apollo 13 and other movies that you watch where you know what happened. But how it happened, when they really zero in on it and you see it, you can take stock of something important, which is the people who started it, the McDonald's brothers, were the ones who were kind of visionary about systematizing. Ray Kroc was selling equipment, and then he sees what they're doing and says, "Oh, this is amazing." Now, Ray Kroc hadn't really run a business on his own. He was working for another company. But then when he saw what they were doing, he had this vision, he takes it over, he grows the business, and he has struggles in doing so, and you can watch all that, and that's, that will be interesting. But he took their systems and he systematized it further. And what he systematized was the process of taking this single place and replicating it multiple times. So to do that, everything had to be very uniform and standardized. So that's what Gerber is saying that you should be thinking about doing with your practice, right? If you're thinking about, oh, I'm going to sell it one day, whether you are or aren't, or I'm going to scale this so I can have 20 law firms like this, whether you are or aren't, and you probably aren't because that would be kind of crazy. But when you think like that, it changes how you act in your business. So you want to work on your business, not in it. And if you work in it, you're going to become miserable and go slowly mad, like the Joseph Heller quote. And so what you really need to focus on is your business should not be your life, right? If it is your life, it is your all-consuming thing, then you are a slave to the business. You're working in it. It owns you. You're just another employee inside of that business. So how do we avoid doing this? We use, he says you need to work off of the business prototype, the franchise business prototype. And he says there are 3 rules to this kind of business model, the franchise business prototype, which again, remember, I know you're not going to start franchising your law firm, nor could you, but here are the rules that let you think about this in a deeper way. This model, if you use it, will provide consistent value to your customers beyond their expectations. In other words, you're trying to think about ways in your business to systematically, through the work of other people and other things mostly, not you. Yes, you need to do some things, but if you're the only person doing this, it's not good. So the model, the system itself, your business itself, needs to provide consistent value to your customers. That would be good enough, but he adds beyond their expectations, because if you want to outpace your competitors, you need to do an exceptional job. The model will be operated by people at the lowest level of skill. Now, there's a whole discussion in the book in several different places about a common problem that happens with small businesses. And that is they get this amazingly great employee or person who's working in the business, and that person is a superstar. And they start taking on more responsibility, and maybe you pay them more money, and maybe you have to pay them more money because you want to keep them there. And either maybe they get sick and can't work, or maybe they decide to go do their own thing, or whatever happens, these superstars will leave your company. This is a normal thing. And when they do, they'll leave your company in chaos because your whole the whole foundation became you relying on them. So instead of doing that, and you can understand the franchise model of McDonald's here, they don't hire great managers to figure out how to run the operation. They systematized everything so that it could be operated by people at the lowest level of skill. Because you need to have this business exhibiting impeccable order. And the only way that this is going to happen is if you systematize it. And to do this, you need to document things in an operations manual, your systems book. We've talked about this before, right? That's what John Fisher did. He documented everything, put it in a book, and then he sells it. And if you don't know, I mean, really, people say, well, how do I do this? The answer is start doing it. I mean, you don't want to do it is why it's not being done. Not because you don't know how to do it. I mean, it would be like, let's say you learned how to cook something that, you wanted to be a plate at a restaurant and you're not even a chef. Okay. And you go, well, I created this thing and now I want other people to cook it for me because I don't want to be the one cooking it all the time. What do? You write down the recipe, right? And you know how to do it. And is it going to be perfect the first time? No, you might go, well, I'm just going to write it down off the top of my head. And then you give it to somebody and they execute it and they don't do well because you left out a step or you didn't describe it well enough. So you need to develop the skill of documenting things in an operations manual and giving them to people who are going to do it at the lowest level of skill so that number one, you can pay them as little as possible. And two, you can, substitute in somebody quickly if that person leaves. You also need to provide uniformly predictable service to the customers, which is kind of, number one, giving them consistent value, and also number three, having impeccable order. So number five, I think, kind of recapitulates a couple of the other ones. So I think really it's the first four are the key. And then number six talks about using uniform color and dress code and facility codes. This is not relevant to lawyers, so this is not important. Although in a bigger firm, you could say people have to be dressed a certain way, but this is not one you need to delve into. So I think it's really the first four that are the most relevant. So the key question, there's a couple of key questions to ask that you should be asking. Like number one, how can I get my business to work except without me, or, with me as interfering as little as possible? Like how can I get my people to work, but without my constant involvement or interference? These are the key questions. And the biggie is, how can I own my business, but also be free from it, right? And it's possible. I mean, we know people who've done this. I've talked about Lee Rosen in the past. He sold his business last October or November. He grew it from just him to a couple of people, got to a point where he had an operations manager who ran the firm, made sure that person understood what to do, went through the cycle of problems of hiring employees, and every conceivable thing that Lee needed to document or teach his manager how to do, he did. And then he packed up his bags and moved to Florida for a while. And then he and his wife packed up their bags, sold everything, and got on a European lark vacation, which they've been on for 2 years. And they live out of their suitcase and they bop around. But he was doing that while his firm was still running because it didn't need him to be there. And he's not the only one who's done this. So it can be done. Do you want to sell your business and follow Lee around Europe? No, maybe you don't, but you should be thinking about how to build your business so that you aren't the only one who runs it. So how do you start this? Where do we start now that we understand what the overall strategy is and so forth? What do you do? Well, I'll tell you what Gerber said, and what other people say is you need to begin with the vision of your ideal business, and you need to identify whom you want to serve. So I have prepared these materials, and I know I've posted them in the Slack area before. The Vision Quest Brainstorm Workbook, and then I have this thing called Magic Insight Marketing Message Builder, which helps you figure out what your ideal client is and so forth. This is the kind of thing that we will do a little bit of at the Total Transformation Workshop for those of you that are on the call who are coming to that. But this is the kind of thing that you should really be working on this a lot. You should really dial this in. And part of the reason why people don't do it is they just think they need to serve lots of different people. They don't understand the marketing implications of that. They don't understand the operational intricacies that come with trying to serve two different kinds of clients. One that involves you like going to federal court, and the other one that involves you handling real estate documents and closings. Coordinating your calendar based on what kind of clients you represent can be an operational problem. So you need to figure out, well, what do I want to be doing when I'm not practicing law? If I'm free from my practice, what would I be doing? All right, what kind of practice can I have that supports that? And that's where some people will begin to say, well, I don't know. I don't think I could do that. Because my identity is I am this kind of lawyer. And I understand that, because when I went into practice by myself after leaving the big firm, I said, I'll just do what I normally did, which was commercial litigation, except I'll use technology to make it more efficient and better. And I did. I made it easier for me to do, and I didn't have to have employees, but I still had to go to court, and I didn't, like the impingement on my freedom that brought, because when you're the only person in the firm, it's not like I can say, well, okay, junior associate, take over here for me while I go on vacation. So that became a struggle. And then I found that there were these clients that would call me out of the blue because I had a website, and I would talk about different things. And I was involved in franchising cases because my company, my firm that I was with before represented Popeyes. And then when I left, Popeyes kept giving me work. And I knew the litigation part of franchising, but I also knew the transactional part of it, because that was always an issue in the franchise cases I dealt with. So I understood how to advise people that wanted to open a franchise. And I had never thought of that as something that I would do, because I just figured, why would I do that? But people reached out to me and asked me to do it. And I thought, oh, well, okay, I will do that. And they said, well, what do you charge? And I thought, I will charge them, I don't know, $500, because this is going to be ridiculously easy. And it was ridiculously easy, because it was a fixed amount of time that they wanted me to consult with them, until they got going. And when they joined their franchise, they didn't want me to keep advising them. So I thought this was really great. Now, and then I got more clients like this, because I started being strategic about trying to lure them in using marketing. And I raised my rates, and I kept raising them, thinking, well, I'm giving them great value. They tell me I'm giving them great value. They don't even question the cost. I could collect the money up front. That was a really great thing. But I still thought of myself as a litigator. So I didn't think this through. If I had, I would have thought, why don't I just do that instead of litigation, because that's too disruptive of my life. But my point is, my identity was tied up in the thing that I had been doing the longest. So it tripped me up and made it harder for me to see how beneficial it would be to do this other completely different kind of practice. And I really didn't take advantage of that the way I should have. But eventually I started doing what I'm doing now, and I'm not practicing law. So it's, I solved the problem of being trapped in a certain place at a certain time. But my point is, we all have this problem. Okay. So we need to figure out what we want in our lives, and then who we want to serve, because that's one, important. So we know what kind of clients we want, but also important in terms of marketing and so forth. So those resources are in there, and I recommend you check them out. Now, another business guru who's not as well known outside the world of certain kind of online marketing and marketing in general, real estate. He's a real estate guy, so he's known in Florida and other places. But he's a big shot. He's somebody that a lot of the people I know who are big shots, know and consult with and pay good money to. But he's one of those people who's out there who's, available. I don't know if he doesn't have courses, but he's got ebooks that you can download. And so I downloaded one the other day because of a series of things I won't get into. And I had known about him. So I downloaded his ebook, and the book he's got two of them, but this is the one that I recommend. It's called Breakthrough DNA. And it's pretty amazing. And I'm reading it, right after I read E-Myth, and I thought, wow, this is the same thing. Now there's different emphasis. He calls things a different thing, but it's the same principle. Number one profit activator of the 8, he's got, look at this, narrow your focus and select one target market parens at a time. Now he says at a time because he knows you're going to want to do more. He says, that's okay, that's fine. But just focus on one and do it one at a time so that you can build out something that's successful and works really well automatically and systematically. Then you can go on to the other one. many people won't because they'll realize they haven't enough work. So pick the one you really like the most or think you're going to really like the most and focus on that. And then look at the bottom. Who are you going to serve? That's really the question, right? Who are you going to help? And it makes everything else fall into place. If you don't do this first, everything else becomes either less effective or a lot harder. And I know I've beaten this horse before, and you may think it's dead, but I see it twitching. So I'm going to keep beating it. All right, so here's some things to help you brainstorm. Like ask yourself questions like this, like what's the vision for your practice? Well, that's a big question. What does that really mean? Do you want more clients? Some people go, no, I don't want more clients. What I want are more good clients. Do you want to ease your workload? Are you overwhelmed? Are you doing perfectly well? Not every lawyer, has the same vision. Are you willing to embrace automation to do things in your workload? Do you understand about the trade-offs of using automation, which are, it doesn't always work. It's not, set it and forget it. It doesn't work perfectly the first time. It's probably not worth you trying to do it. So, are you capable of setting up and fine-tuning the automation? Maybe you are. I certainly am, but I've figured out that I would rather pay an expert to set it up for me and fine-tune it because I found that that's better for me and it's better for my business. Would you rather have other people help ease your workload? Are you willing to spend the time to carefully vet those people? Because if you need them, you're going to have to hire the right people. That's going to be key. Or would you rather have somebody else vet it for you who knows how to do that? You want to train them? Well, you have to do that if you want these people to work really well, unless you're going to have a really good systems manual. You're going to need to hire for a higher skill level. And how much training do they need? Do you even know what kind of training they all need? Like they might need word training. Do you know how to do that? There's a lot of things people need training to do in these days that you don't take stock of. Like if you're gonna work virtually, do they have cloud skills or do they know how to use cloud tools? Are you willing to use virtual assistants as opposed to people? All these questions are questions you should ask, because if you're not willing to delegate work or automate, if you're stuck in this only I can do this mindset, well, you're not going to grow your business. You're not going to sell it for a lot of money. And by the way, if you do decide to sell your business, like Lee Rosen did, just think how much more money you're going to get and how much more money he got, because the person looking to buy it can say, oh, you've documented everything and you've got this office manager who knows how everything runs, and all I'm doing is buying your business, and then you're going to step away completely, and I'm going to take the office manager who knows how everything works, and they're going to show me how to do this. Obviously, they're going to pay a lot more money for the business because the business has greater equity, right? That's the key point. So pretend that you're growing your law firm to eventually sell it. That's the top piece of advice. You may not, but then again, you may. And that's what's going to lead to a successful business. So thank you, and I will see you guys in the next lesson.